Welcome everyone to a webinar put on by the Organic Farmers Association. We are an organization that represents organic farmers around the United States, certified organic farmers. We do a lot of policy work and education work, and our board of directors and our policies are run by certified organic farmers. And we are a small staff, and we are bringing you this webinar today with two speakers, Leah Sieler. Is that how you say? I'm not sure how you say your last name. Sieler, from the Western Organic Dairy Producers Association, and she we'll be talking about a survey that we sent out to organic farmers around the country about the effects that the strengthening organic enforcement new regulation has had on their certification activities, their inspection, the documentation they have to maintain, and all of that, their certification paperwork, their organic system plan. So she'll start out talking about what the dairy farmers had to say, and then Carolyn Dimitri will get on. She's with an applied economist with the New York University, and she has collated all the information from the other people, other than dairy farmers, the rest of organic farmers, which is a large group. And what they had to say. So this, we're hoping will be able to inform the National Organic Program as well on, how things are going with the rollout of this stronger enforcement regulation that was put in place about 2 years ago. So with that, I'm going to let Leah start, and I believe she's going to share her screen. And here we are. Okay, Leah, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harriet. As Harriet had stated, I'm the executive director for the Western Organic Dairy Producers Alliance. So we really represent organic dairy farmers in the 12 Western states. We branch out a little bit more than that now because we have such great relationships with folks in the Midwest, the Northeast, and kind of everything in between. So we try to really present a unified front wherever we can across the board. And that kind of leads me into the survey results that I'm going to share today. So this was actually survey results from a survey that both WODPA and NODPA, so the Northeast Organic Dairy Producers Association, put out together. So focusing really on the impacts of SOE and origin of livestock. It's not letting me move forward.
Try an arrow down or the enter key.
Okay. Now I think it's going to work. It froze for some reason after I just bragged about my internet. Okay. So really looking at the survey that we put together, we focused specifically on strengthening organic enforcement rule, as well as origin of livestock and what those impacts looked like for organic dairy farmers specifically. They've experienced a lot of negative ramifications that they had communicated to us. And a lot of times it was just very quick over the phone comments that they had, whether it be from inspectors or from their certifiers as they're going through paperwork or new implementation. But we wanted to get a little bit more formalized feedback so that we could go back to both the National Organic Program as well as the certifiers that we have as stakeholders and really let them know what our organic farmers are feeling and how they're seeing it being implemented on their farms so that hopefully we can improve the relationship that our organic dairy farmers have with their certifiers and with the National Organic Program. And understanding that certifiers are there to help our farmers and to make sure that they stay in compliance, but to have a positive relationship with them rather than just having a feared relationship, which is what we were starting to really see. So the metrics that we saw from our survey, 37 organic dairy farms throughout the United States had actually participated. They were anywhere from certified 5 years to certified 25 years in the organic dairy industry. And the states that were represented by our research were California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Texas, Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Maine. So we covered quite a bit of land there. Over 15,000 cows were represented in our survey results. We also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just one certifier or just a couple of certifiers that we were hearing this feedback from, but it was actually across the board. So these farms that took these surveys were certified by the whole list that you can see here. We've got CCOF, Oregon Tilth, MOCA, which no longer is certifying livestock operations, organic certifiers, QAI, and the list goes on and on. So we made sure to really represent how farmers are being treated across the board from different certifiers, and making sure that it's not just one certifier's issue, but that it's multiple. It's really the implementation of these new rules and how it's trickling down to our farmers. Okay. One of the things that we did also hear very heavily was certification cost increases. And this is really just a plug for the work that I think all of us are doing, advocating for cost share program, as well as different opportunities, funding opportunities for our farmers, because our farmers are seeing increases of anywhere from 50% to 200% of what their normal certification costs were. And a lot of this has been attributed by certifiers to the amount of work that goes into checking how they're compliant with strengthening organic enforcement rule and the paperwork that goes along with it. More specifically, they're also asking for proof through QuickBooks or other third-party companies on organic sales. So no longer taking what the farmers are saying, but actually asking for third-party proof of what those organic sales look like to make sure that they're essentially getting the correct amount of money. So going back to the survey results, topics that have been focused on in on-site inspections that really seemed more invasive or specific than usual. The number one item of feedback that we got was traceability of animals. In the past, you have needed to show where your animals are going, whether they're going, if you're sending them out for sale, for slaughter, anything like that. You obviously need to show proof of that, but we were seeing requirements of paperwork that were 3 to 5 times more and very repetitive. So the feedback that we were getting is that the National Organic Program would come in, they would take a look at what the certifiers were receiving, and they would say, yes, but you're not checking this box. So because of that, certifiers would create yet another document for folks to have to fill out. So it really just started feeling repetitive. In addition to that, they were also being asked for third-party results from different animal welfare certifiers. So asking for the annual summary from their inspections with Validus or the farm program, as well as a couple others, but those were the 2 main ones. They asked for employee training logs. So rather than just saying, yes, our employees are trained, they actually wanted to see the proof. And the frustrating part about this is if they're asking for the third-party summary results and they're actually combing through the results, that information has already been verified by other third parties. And so asking for employee training logs seems redundant when they're already asking for summaries. Requests for animal inventories for the past 3 to 5 years. So not just focusing on the past year or the past 2 years, but going back in the archives and looking for animal inventories to compare for the past 3 to 5 years. And then finally, financials, invoices, and past non-compliance reports were requested from previous years. So going, and a lot of times these certifiers were asking for them prior to inspections. So they were really, instead of going in with no preconceived notions of the farm and what kind of the dynamics are and what the relationship looks like between the certifier, the inspectors were actually asking for these non-compliance reports so that they could review them prior to going on site. In addition to that, one of the biggest things was that they had required that templates that were already filled out multiple times be refilled out because they didn't have one of those small boxes checked. So making them refill out paperwork with only minor changes rather than allowing them to just go in and fix the paperwork that they've already documented and uploaded for their facility. Really, we were looking at the organic system plans that were already uploaded, a lot of times handwritten or done with physical paperwork rather than online. The online certifiers, or the certifiers that had online platforms, we weren't seeing this as much. It was a little bit easier for them to change their processes and to fix this. Our farmers also reported getting docked or getting non-compliances for not having correct specific seed information. So they would go to their seed broker and they would ask for seed, and instead of essentially certifiers being okay with getting the seeds, getting the documentation for those seeds, they would have to have at least 3 affidavits for trying to get untreated organic seed from 3 different locations before they could finally just send the untreated seed. And then finally, the list of past non-compliances and proof the farm has fixed them. We had reports of multiple farms being asked for this going back over 5 years. So not just that 3 to 5 year mark that we were seeing for other documentation, but going back past that. We actually had one farm that reported having to go back 9 years prior for their non-compliance. So we took this information and we went to the National Organic Program and we said, this is the feedback that we got, and these are the clarifications that we're needing. This is where farmers are a little bit confused. This is some of the information that seems like it gets a little bit differently interpreted depending on the certifier that's being used. So we asked for some clarifications directly from National Organic Program. Number one clarification that we asked for was, when calculating pasture and dry matter intake, is it a weighted average over all of the pasture season, or is it on a per day basis? So we gave an example there. It was clearly identified that it is on an average basis. So you're taking your average for the pasture season rather than on a per day basis. The other question we had was, do heifers, dry cows, and lactating cows all have to be pastured or grazing at the same time? Again, the answer is yes. And finally, if a material is already listed on OMRI, why does it need to be approved by certifiers individually for use on farm prior to actually using it? And this was a big one because it doesn't necessarily make sense. If you see it listed on OMRI, why would you have to go through extra steps before you can use it? And a big problem with this is that certifiers were taking upwards of 2 to 5 months before they were actually approving any materials, any new materials. And by that point, either you figured out something else on a product that you've already been using, or you're no longer dealing with the issue you were trying to fix with that material. And so we talked to them about that. The clarification that was provided is that a lot of times there's specific requirements that go along with the materials that need to be communicated to farmers. So just one of those disconnects that I think needs to be communicated again. Some of the interesting feedback that we also got from farmers were just yes or no questions, just trying to gauge and understand where they were at with the process of getting things approved through National Organic Program and the NOSB process and that sort of thing, and actually understanding where the strengthening organic enforcement rule and origin of livestock rule both came in. So asking them, are you familiar with strengthening organic enforcement rule and origin of livestock rule? A majority of them said yes. So the education there for that implementation was proving to be positive. But when asked, have you been involved in oral or written comments to the National Organic Standards Board for Origin of Livestock or Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule, pretty consistently we heard no's. And a lot of folks didn't even know that that was a thing. And so that told us that we, as organizations, need to be better about educating our farmers on what those opportunities look like for commenting and what those rules are looking like that the National Organic Standards Board is looking into, so that we can make sure to give proper feedback from the farmer perspective. So then we broke it down and we looked for opportunities for certifiers to help. Number one, we asked for a summary of changes when new rules are implemented. Some certifiers are doing this, but a majority of them actually are not. So sending out a frequently asked questions page that's actually updated, as well as a summary of what's going on. And this is something that both NODPA and WODPA do provide to our members, but that doesn't go across the board. This is something that certifiers really could provide to their clients to allow them to know what updates are happening. In addition, we also identified clear written answers to questions regarding rules. A lot of times it's phone call conversations, or it's, well, let us know how you interpret it and we'll tell you if that's right or wrong. And that doesn't work very well for our farmers. On-time, up-to-date certificates within 12 months given to clients, farmers, without having to ask multiple times. It would blow you away the amount of times that farmers have to ask for updated certificates. And the amount of farmers who have to actually ask their certifiers when their inspections are going to be, rather than their inspectors or their certifiers reaching out and letting them know. This should not be something that's initiated by the farmers, because it should be on an annual 12-month basis. So because of that, the expectation should be, if we're paying the certifiers, they should be the ones that are providing both the certificates when it's completed, as well as the actual date and timeline of what the inspections look like. Yes. We're always asking for more knowledgeable, trained inspectors. That's constantly an ask that we have, and it's part of our due diligence to also make sure that we're open to training these inspectors. So I will say that it seems like it's gotten a little bit better. Folks are that are familiar with the organic dairy industry have started doing more inspections. And it's very tricky when it comes to organic dairies, because you're having to do a livestock inspection as well as a handling or a crops inspection. So making sure that folks are familiar with both of those components. And then finally, feedback surveys on inspectors. Again, a couple of certifiers do this, but it's nice to have that open window of communication between the farmers and the certifiers. Then we presented opportunities for the National Organic Program to help. Again, providing more frequently asked question sheets, printed and mailed, as well as emailed. We do have a lot of folks that don't use email, and so asking them to print and mail them, we know that that's a cost, but at the same time, it's worth the investment to get the information out there. Organic system plan template moving forward as rules are implemented. I'm not going to belabor this point, because we do have a common OSP that's been released recently. Annual feedback survey on certifiers. So having, again, that open window of communication between the client and the National Organic Program to let them know how certifiers are doing. And then transparency on how evaluated risk-based certification process works. A lot of farmers were feeling like there was no transparency of conversations between the National Organic Program, National Organic Standards Board, certifiers, and farmers. And so there seemed to be a disconnect between each of those groups. A couple of folks, or a couple of quotes, I should say, that we wanted to make sure to share from dairy farmers, just kind of capturing what their feelings were about strengthening organic enforcement rule coming into enforcement. Certifiers are asking for a lot more information that isn't found or backed by organic regulations. They're no longer employing sound and sensible approach to certification. And this year, more than any other year, it feels as if they want to catch us doing something wrong and just get mad at us rather than helping us to comply. And this really was what our farmers were sharing in 3 quotes. So really having that negative relationship between certifiers and farmers that we want to make sure to fix. Yep, messy. So with that, that was our survey results. I did want to provide contact information for both Western Organic Dairy Producers Alliance as well as the Northeast Organic Dairy Producers Alliance. Both Ed and I have worked pretty heavily together on the survey results here, as well as using these survey results to advocate for our dairy farmers with the National Organic Program, as well as with certifiers that we have as stakeholders. So if you have any questions, please make sure to capture down our contact information and feel free to reach out to us. I also did want to put in just a little plug really quick. We both have our annual conference, trade show, and field days coming up here soon. So make sure that those are on your calendar. If you're in our area, we'd love to have you there. But with that, that is what I have for you today.
Okay. Thank you, Leah. And as usual, farmers don't just complain, they try to come up with some practical solutions of how we can make it better. So thank you for that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn. I think you can
Yep, I will share.
Share your screen there.
Great. Thanks very much, Leah. That was really interesting. Okay.
I can see it. Excellent.
All right. All righty. So you can just, oh, wait. Huh.
Yeah, it just looks like it's not in.
It's
Yeah,
not
I'm just going to, it's
presentation
not going
mode.
Yeah, it won't be in full page mode because apparently it's being temperamental, but that's fine. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the work I did with Julia Barton on looking at farmer experiences with certification and inspection post SOE. And even though like my style is very different from Leah's, our populations are a little different. We did have some dairy farmers, but mostly other kinds of farmers. We actually have some very similar findings, which I think is a good sign. So I'm a researcher, so I'm just going to like talk to you all like I'm talking to our research group. So like our main research question was try to understand how farmers experience different aspects of certification, including the certification process, the inspection, the inspector, and the documentation, and how it was post SOE compared to before SOE. So we use this method called retrospective comparison, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So the survey was out in the field from November 25th to January 26th. I basically took the lead on developing the survey, and OFAA gave a lot of critical feedback to make it farmer friendly and to make sure all of the important points were covered. It had 25 questions. OFA sent it out to their membership several times, and we included a $50 lottery for 10 winners, 10 survey respondents. Surprisingly, I had to talk to like 25 people before people would actually take the money because they thought it was OFA's money, but it wasn't. But I thought it was good-hearted. Anyway, so we had 181 valid and complete surveys, and 180 of these were certified farmers, and one was an exempt farmer. So I'm going to just describe the operations of the farms who answered. So 98% had a crop certification. 23% had a livestock certification. So basically every livestock farmer had a crop certification also, and 18% had handling certifications. And so we really just looked at crop and livestock, although for this particular presentation, I've lumped them into one category. So the typical farm was very tiny, from like 0.25 acre was the smallest farm, and the largest one was 12,000 acres. So it covered a big range. And the average farm size was 385 acres. And if you take out that very big 12,000 acre farm, it drops down to 319. And so the average farm in the US is about 440 acres. So, and then the average organic farm is like slightly smaller. So I think this is like a good representation of the different kinds of organic farms that are out there. And the median farm was 80 acres. So the farms, okay, I'm going to look at some of my notes too. So the farms, 12% of the farms had transition acres, and the average number of acres in transition for those farms was 198. About 80% were 100% organic, and the ones that were split had an average of 514 acres. So the split farms tend to be a little bit larger. And those farms had about 300 organic acres. And so the farmers that answered this survey seem to have like a little more farming experience than the dairy farmers and Leah's, where we had some that were just had been certified, all the way up to one person who had been farming organically for 69 years. And so the average number of years was 17 and the median number was 15. And that's kind of important because what we did find out was, USDA talks about beginning farmers, which are farmers who are farming for less than 10 years. So in this particular sample, 28% were farming for less than 10 years. And if you look at the organic census that the Department of Agriculture does, what you see is about almost half of organic farmers are beginning farmers. So I think the people who answered the survey had much more experience than the average organic farmer. And so that probably could skew the results a little bit. So these farmers sold 60% went direct to consumer, and those who use the direct to consumer channel, and that's like the farmers market, your CSA and local farm store. For those farms, about 70%, an average of 70% of their sales went direct to consumer. The farmers that sold regionally to like a food hub or to a local grocery store that sells farm identified food, that was 42% of the farms and about 34% of their sales. And then a little bit more than half sold into the national or international markets, and that was about 88% of their sales. So the farmers that use those channels really sold a lot of their product in those channels. So USDA has this long discussion about like, how do you measure the size of a farm? Because you could look at acres or you could look at sales. And so the argument for using sales is like that you could have a rangeland operation, which doesn't have a lot of sales, but it will have a lot of land. But you could have like a small vegetable operation where it could have few acres, but the value of its sales could be very high. So what you see here is I broke down, these are the categories that we ask people to report their sales in. So you have the very small farms with less than 10,000 acres, and then you have the large farms with less than $10,000 worth of sales. And then you have the very large ones with sales of more than $1 million. You look at this bar in the middle and you see like most of the farms are centered around the 100 to 199,000, but there are farms that span pretty much this whole category. And more than 10% had sales of 1 million or more. So I guess this is another way that I think this is gives a good representation of different scales of farm operations. Okay, so this retrospective view, I think probably a lot of people have heard about this idea of doing like a pre and post survey, like what do you think before something happens, and then what do you think after it happens? So the new way of doing this now in the survey world is to ask people about their current experience, and then you ask them to give a retrospective view of their previous experience. So what we asked was, we had 13 aspects of the getting certified that ranged from like filling out the OSP all the way to what happens post-inspection. And Julia really helped me with crafting those 13 steps so that they would be accurate. And then we asked them when they filled out the survey, which was either late 2025 or early 2026, was it easier or harder compared to last time? And so if you look at this, I just picked out a few that were kind of interesting. And easier, the first column is easier. So what you see is filling out the OSP, like 19% of the farmers found it easier, but 17% found it harder. So I think it's like important to look at both of those when you try to get a sense of like, how is this impacting farmers overall? And the most notable one is the post-inspection follow-up, where 11% said it was easier, but 25% said it was harder. And this, I think, echoes the things that Leah said that they found on their survey, that some of the post-inspection parts were problematic. Okay, so looking at the individual 13 characteristics or steps is important, but what I tried to do here was collapse all 13 of those different parts of getting certified into one number. So I made this index, and I'll just briefly explain how I did it. And if you really want more detail, you can send me an email and I can go into it with you. So we asked, was it easier, the same, or harder? So if it was easier, that was scored 0. If it was the same, it was scored 1. And if it was harder, it was scored 2. So I just, for every farm that answered, I just collapsed those into one number. So if it was, and then I divided it by 26, which is the highest that it could be if everything was harder. So if you look at the scale on the bottom of this chart here, if you look at 1, and 1 would mean that that particular farm reported that every single thing was harder after SOE than it was before SOE. And you see that's a pretty significant, well, I mean, I don't know what makes it significant, but that's about 5% of the farmers that answered the survey. And then if you look at this line that I have in the middle with 0.50, those are the farmers that said everything was basically the same as it was before. So it wasn't easier, it wasn't harder. So everyone to the right of that line, at least some parts were harder. And everyone to the left of that line, some parts were easier. So if you break that down into percents, 32% said the process was overall easier. 31% said it was the same. That's that line on the chart. And 37% said it was harder. So I think that also drives home the point that farmers are having different experiences with inspection and the certification process on post-SOE. Okay, so feedback on documentation requirements. Things that so we asked them, was the traceback and the mass balance in like post inspection, was it smooth? And so 21% it was harder. I mean, excuse me, let me start that over again. We asked about whether was the mass balance or traceback audit smooth, and 21% said it was. 21% that the certifier did not like the format of their documentation, but accepted it anyway. 32%, and this matches what Leah was saying before, said that they were asked for redundant documents. So only 14%, which I think is pretty low, of the farmers said that they thought the inspector balanced their time in an appropriate way between looking at their documentation and looking at the fields. And then only 10% thought that they adequately reviewed the fraud plan, which I think is a pretty big part of SOE. So when we asked about what changes were requested by the inspector, 12% said they asked for unusual changes, 11% said the inspector failed to explain everything, and I think this inspector did not cite the regulation also matches what Leah found, where almost 20% of the times the inspector said do these things and didn't really give them a reason for doing it, based in WODPA. And 15% found that the renewal process was not smooth. So other topics that we asked about, did people use the organic integrity database to verify? So like less than half of farmers are using it. A lot of farmers had actually never heard of the organic integrity database, and they wrote in, what's this? 15% did not hear from their certifier about SOE and did not know about SOE. And a surprisingly high share of farmers have received a non-compliance over the course of their time as as an organic farmer. But they basically mentioned that resolving those was for most of them was fairly straightforward. So we did ask this interesting question about why do farmers keep their certification? And actually there should be an article coming out in the Organic Voice soon where we cover all of this information in great detail. And so there was a mix. Like you can see a lot of people do, I won't read these out to you because you can read them yourself. A lot of people do think about giving up their certification. And I think like the ones that do are either like super committed to organic, or they really need to do it for entering certain markets or for pricing reasons. So I feel like there's like this love-hate relationship for many farmers with certification. So my final thoughts really are the implementation of SOE seems to be uneven in terms of farmer experiences. Post SOE, the process is harder for more than a third of the farmers, and I think that that's really something important for the NOP and the certifiers to think about. If you're trying to improve organic integrity, then you shouldn't make life harder for more than a third of the farmers as part of that process. And one of the most challenging moments seems to be like after the inspection time. Alrighty, so thank you so much for listening to all of that. I liked your slides better, Leah. I was hoping to make mine look beautiful, but apparently I don't have that skill.
It looked great. Thank you, Carolyn.
Well, I think though you both presented what we have all seen and the National Organic Program at the NOSB meetings have heard from a lot of producers and even from certifiers too, that this has been, and kind of an extra burden, especially for kind of the small and mid-sized producers who, are owner operators and dealing with their, they don't have staff that are doing all their documentation. And also too, what struck me was also the attitude of the inspectors, somewhat that they are kind of more there to find something wrong rather than to verify what has been written in the organic system plan. And in the past, I have been an inspector, and but not at this time. So I know that there's kind of a changing of the guard. There's a lot of young inspectors coming on, and so we just have to kind of teach them more, maybe some more diplomacy, because they're definitely not going to get much cooperation when they kind of come in there in a confrontational mode. And that's not what organic inspection and certification is about. It's there to verify what you're doing, and not to like, we're going to find something wrong and kick you out. So that's not the deal. And especially the vast majority of operations are doing what they're supposed to do and actually are very committed to wanting a strict rules and a comprehensive inspection. They want to know that that's what the system is for them and for everyone else. So with that, I don't think we have any questions. But I do appreciate both of you doing all of the number crunching and all of that survey review, which did take some time. And I hope that this information will get to the right people, that will be continually improving what we do in organic certification. Any further comments from Leah or Carolyn?
Only last thing that I did want to say was opening the results up to our stakeholder certifiers it brought really positive feedback. So trying to make sure that they understand we're not trying to pinpoint them as the problem. We're not trying to tattle on them to the National Organic Program, but instead trying to provide feedback so that the relationship can strengthen between them and their farmer clients. And that has been really positive for WODPA stakeholders. They've been very thankful for that conversation. And we have started seeing improvement when it comes to inspectors coming on farms and actually having conversations with farmers. So that's been really encouraging and really exciting. We also just did a lunchtime learning webinar yesterday that you'll be able to see the recording on, but it was one of our stakeholder certifiers who was interested in doing a preemptive grazing refresher course, as well as doing non-compliances that they've been seeing so that farmers can improve for their inspections this year. So you're already seeing that those steps are happening, which is really encouraging, really exciting that certifiers are trying their best to have a more positive relationship with their clients. So I do want to give a shout out to them. It's been really, really encouraging, really exciting to see.
Well, and they have a tough job, just as all of us. You read regulatory language, and then you try to put it into in a kind of a practical way you want to implement it, as well as that every situation is different. Actually, the definition of organic production is things that are site specific. So every farm, nobody's going to have, it's not a cookie cutter kind of thing that every farm has the same record keeping, every farm has the same grazing system, every farm is buying the same feed supplements. They're all going to be different. And that's because every farmer is different, every location is different, every animal and breed is different. And that's really the beauty. That's what I loved being an organic inspector, is just seeing how each farm really took the spirit and the heart of organic and put it out on the landscape, and seeing it be implemented beautifully in a way that was environmentally beneficial as well for the animals, for the land, but also for the farmer. So they have to make it work for them. And that's really what we're trying to have certification do, is work for the operators, not just for the regulators.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Carolyn, any parting thoughts?
No, I'm hoping that OFA does something with these survey results. I don't really do advocacy work, so I'm sure you guys will get to it.
Oh,
just take all
yes.
this up and do something with it. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Especially since the data really does point to very specific areas that could use improvement. And so we can show that to the NOP and to certifiers, and yeah,
Great.
you will definitely be using it.
Excellent.
Your work will not be in vain.
Okay, that's wonderful. Just let me know what you need.
Okay, so with that, I am going to cut off the recording, and our webinar is over.